Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
We're going to get into this. The Dallas Mavericks, they're in a really, really awful spot right now. Just absolute world of hurt. So obviously, after the Luka Doncic trade, in which they shouldn't have done that deal in the first place, right? They deal him for AD. And in the first game he plays, he looks awesome, right? We've talked about that, where you could see the vision. You could see the idea for what the Mavs were trying to do in building their team around mostly defensive personnel, right? You felt like they had championship level defense. And if they were healthy, because at that point, Lively was out and other guys were kind of in and out with, different ailments and whatnot. You felt like maybe they could cause a scare for some of those higher seeds. But now that's pretty much dead. Right, because obviously after that point, Anthony Davis got hurt, and he was out for a while with a groin injury. Still isn't back. There's reports that they may consider shutting him down the rest of the season. We don't know for sure yet, but probably headed there, because you also have a scenario where Kyrie Irving gets hurt in a game and he tears his ACL. Right, so his season is done, and it's the worst case scenario because obviously this late in the season, that means he's not going to just be out for the rest of this season. He'll be out for most of next season, right? Because the argument for this deal was, well, the Mavs might be quote-unquote better positioned to win now, but maybe not necessarily in the future. But the problem is that, again, you traded a guy who was a top 5 player in the NBA, right? And, now he's gone, and in its place, right, is, you're led by 2 guys, right, who are 30-plus, who also have injury histories. Now, Anthony Davis had been pretty healthy the last couple of seasons, right? He's played in almost every game the last couple of years, right? Up until right before he got dealt. But you still knew that he had, that there was always the possibility that he could get hurt and miss, X amount of time. Because it has happened before. Same thing with Kyrie Irving. So now they're both hurt. And again, year one is basically done because there's no pathway at all for them to be able to contend this year because your 2 best players are out, right? But then you talk about year 2, probably not much of a pathway there either, because now Kyrie's going to be out for most of next season too, right? Because this is at least a 9-month injury, right? So it's just bad pretty much anywhere and everywhere. I think there was a quote from Nico Harrison, right, where he basically was like, yeah, he was on the road to getting, a max extension. I don't know why you wouldn't want to give that to Luka as well. But either way, for Dallas, it just continues to get worse and worse, where now you just feel really sorry for Mavs fans because, again, they just went to the finals last year. They had a guy that they felt like was their guy, right? In the same way that, Rockets fans felt about Harden and, OKC fans when Russ was there, right? Same thing, right? He was their guy, except, with the Mavs, it felt like you had a legitimate chance, to contend each year. Not that you didn't with Harden. I mean, because he made deep playoff runs, but it was different, right? But with the Mavs, they just went to the finals last year. Bad matchup against the Celtics, but it felt like they improved the roster, and then maybe, just maybe, if they continue to stack up wins, they could go on a run, right? Because they were one of the top seeds in the West before Luka went down. But then that's the worst part, right? Because they had already had a kind of nightmarish season before that because of all of the injuries. Then they trade Luka. Then the guy they trade him for gets hurt in his first game. Then the guy who's left after the Luka trade, Kyrie Irving, who has actually been great for the Mavs, since he's gotten there, especially this season and last season, then he gets hurt, right? He had been playing a ton of minutes, right? He had been playing close to 40 minutes a game for the last 10 games. Of course, it's a freak injury, so, that's not to say that this caused it. It's just a brutal thing, right? Because we know for Kyrie, he's been, kind of the best version of himself since, back in Cleveland, because he had been obviously a great contributor. He had been very healthy this season, and he had seemingly, seemed to be a great voice in the locker room, right? So now that guy's gone, and now if you're the Mavs, now you're kind of looking at this season as a complete wash, where now you're going from from a finals appearance to probably the lottery at this point, because, with Kyrie being done, I'd imagine they're probably going to shut AD down the rest of the way. Maybe they plan, but there's really no point, because you're not really going to do anything this year without Kyrie. AD's their best player, but you need both of those guys if you wanted to make some type of run. I guess in a way that clears the road for Phoenix to get into that 10 spot. Maybe Portland, who knows? But just pretty much just complete disaster for the Mavs. And again, like Kyrie had a great season, right? This year, he was giving you 25, 5, and 5, and 47 from the field, 40 from three. So, he was named an all-star, albeit an injury replacement. But just in general, just to lose that guy, after trading Luka and after already being without AD for a while, just really hurts if you're the Mavs. And now you're going from looking like a team that would, worst case scenario, be a contender every year to now you're probably done. Because again, there's now you kind of wonder, do they do anything this summer? Do they maybe go after someone else? But even if they do, you don't have Kyrie for at least most of next season. So it's all bad. And it seems very avoidable, like it was very avoidable. Like you could have just not done what you did in the first place. But it's already done, so now you just kind of figure out where to go from here. But, if you're a Mavs fan, I mean, this has got to be this is a nightmare. And, this is kind of just a classic case of, just new ownership, right? But the worst version of it, right? Where you have new ownership coming in and basically completely changing everything, right? And sometimes that can be a good thing, right? We've seen that for some of these teams where new ownership comes in and it ends up helping because you got rid of the bad ownership. But then there's other times where there's this, right? And then it's just completely gone in the other direction where, it just, I don't even know what you do at this point if you're the Mavs. Because, I mean, like, they've won too many games to fall all the way down into, like, the bottom five. So, like, even if you're out of the play-in, you'd have to get really, really lucky. I mean, yeah, they're probably going to lose most of the games the rest of the way. But even so, even right now, they're still a game above 500. So they got a ways to go to be able to catch some of these other teams who at some point will also probably start pulling the plug, right? Like, we've heard with the Spurs, De'Aaron Fox might go get his surgery on his finger, right? So it's just, obviously you have the teams that were already at the bottom anyways. So just tough.
Yeah, I mean, this is a case of, we saw so little of, why you would, in theory, kind of make this trade, but we saw so much of why you absolutely never make this kind of trade, in terms of the Luka for AD thing. Because, like, bro, the man played 3 quarters, for your team the entire season. Anthony Davis, that is. And it just doesn't make sense. You're building a roster around 2 guys that are, older, like you said, have injury concerns, and then lo and behold, both of them get injured in, some pretty severe and odd ways. Like with the whole AD thing, just a weird incident. First, it went from, yeah, it's nothing serious to, oh, yeah, now he's going to miss, weeks and now months and, now potentially, the whole season is going to be shut down for him. And then Kyrie with a crazy, unfortunate ACL injury. And, you always hate to see that kind of stuff because, completely non-contact and just ridiculous. And shout out to him for, nailing the free throws post-injury. But holy crap, like everything that you could think of that could go wrong for the Dallas Mavericks pretty much did. And it all started with one move before the trade deadline that absolutely blew up the entire world. Makes no sense. I think some people still aren't over it. I know Mavericks fans are not. It makes no sense whatsoever. I think, Nico Harrison, he made a mistake. Like, I get it. You want to create, a different kind of team, a different kind of identity. But I just think that you could have retooled the team, differently without trading away your best player. And that's where it all starts. When you get rid of a top 5 player like that, I mean, what realistic returns are you really going to get, and that's the interesting thing. I know more and more has come out, like, the Dallas Mavericks apparently approached Minnesota about a 1-for-1 swap with Anthony Edwards or whatever. But, even that, like, it's just weird and it still doesn't make sense to me. And I know, like, some people are trying to say and validate, the Dallas Mavericks by saying, they were scared of the CBA, but, they weren't in a situation like Minnesota where, you're trading Karl Anthony Towns. Like, I think that one makes a little bit more sense. You can rationalize that because you don't want to pay him like that. But it's Luka Doncic we're talking about. I would think you would want to keep that guy on your team and within your franchise for, as long as possible. And, they were on track to win the championship at some point, in his career. They just had to retool. And I think, the roster was good enough to get back there as like a sleeper team for sure, because we all know what Luka can do in the postseason, and we already know what kind of defensive identity they already had there. And Kyrie was playing pretty well, with Luka in and out of the lineup. But overall, it's just nasty, man. And to have both of the guys that you were kind of counting on to lead you come postseason go down, and on top of that, other guys that were, crucial parts of your team last year in the postseason go down as well. I mean, the season is over, unfortunately, and the small glimmer of hope is maybe you can lose the 20 games and, enter the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, but even that is super unrealistic. That's, a pipe dream at this point, but I don't even know what to say. It's really depressing to even talk about, like, how bad this team got hit with in terms of bad injury luck and, pure incompetence, in my opinion. Because another thing, this will be my final point on this thing, but, with the Kyrie injury, that's the one that makes me the most mad, because they put a lot of pressure on the guy, and I understand, when you're the best player on that team at that point, because AD is not healthy, you kind of have to be playing 40 minutes a night and kind of willing your team to wins at some point. But that's too much pressure, I think, on a guy, of that age and that kind of archetype of player, because we already know, it's not that he takes bad shots or anything like that, but his body, takes a toll with those kinds of shots and the footwork and, the flexibility that does take. And you could definitely see within that injury, like, it just gave away. I think it was too much pressure over time throughout the season, because he was having a magical season. But then, you force him to be the number one option at this age and also be playing in 35 to 40 minutes a night. It's just not fair. So I would also say incompetence on the Dallas Mavericks as well. Just a horrible season for them.
Yeah, and imagine, like, some of the guys who came there in the offseason, right?
Yeah.
Because they were, kind of going there initially playing with Luka and the Mavs, with
crazy.
a chance to go to, like, say, like a Klay Thompson, right? Because
Yeah.
he left Golden State to go to Dallas. Going into the season, it looked like, Dallas had a way better shot at contending than Golden State. Now it's flipped, right? Because, now Golden State makes the Butler deal. Now they're primed and ready for a playoff run. And now Dallas is probably headed, like I said, for the missing the playoffs, right? Like, and it's wild, right? Because the year before they made the finals, they missed the playoffs, but they also sold the season away so they could get that lottery pick, right? And that ended up actually working in their favor. But this time, that's not the case. It's just a scenario where just, again, every single thing you could think of that could go wrong went wrong. And then somehow it was even worse than that, right? Just because, again, like, now your franchise guy is gone, and those guys are very hard to come by, right? And you can see the difference he makes for the Lakers, right? Where since he's been there, I mean, before he went there, they were winning. But now they're winning at a pace and a rate where now they look like they could possibly contend for the title, right? Like, they look like a legit championship level team where, to add insult to injury, right? If you're, a Mavs fan, right? And then you watch Luka go to LA and possibly contend for a title there, that makes it even worse, right? So, and, him basically making the case for, like you said, why you shouldn't do a deal like this. And that's why these type of moves, it usually doesn't work out. Like, the only situations where these usually make sense is if it's a guy where it seems kind of clear that he's probably not a franchise guy. But I think we thought that Luka is a franchise guy, right? It's not, he's a top 5 player, and those guys don't grow on trees. So,
It's crazy, bro. I think people really still are in shock, from the initial move, because it doesn't make sense. And like you said, compare the two teams. Look at the two situations. Like, obviously the Lakers, were playing some pretty good basketball before Luka got there, but he's just reinvigorated the team as well. It's given them a boost. Like, you could tell that there's, I think, hope beyond the season, because I think the Lakers, prior to Luka getting there, we're definitely playing with, a little bit of a different motivating factor, maybe some more of, like, desperation kind of thing, but this is more like, playing for the future and playing, the end game. And I think that's a big driving factor versus Dallas, where it's like,
Right.
what are we even playing for at this point? What are we doing, guys?
Right, because that's the thing, right? Because like say with AD on the roster, like they were playing really well, but you still didn't necessarily feel like they were gonna have a real chance at winning the title. Maybe they
Yeah.
might be able to win a round or two, but probably not be able to get out of the West or win the finals. But now you've watched them with Luka, especially as he's been playing much better since the early, since his first few games there, where now he looks like himself again for the most part. And now they look even more dangerous where, now
Yeah.
they're, pretty, like I said, they're, as of right now, this recording, still a 2 seed, right? And, with the way that the rest of the West is shaping up, they might, they look like they might stay a top 3 seed. So, and that puts you right in, a prime spot for championship contention where, where it didn't look like that before, right? Because like you said, two different directions where the Lakers now, they're moving upward, right? If you put them in the
Yeah.
power rankings wherever you had them before the Luka trade, even if you had them high, you move them up. Now the Mavs, you move them way down, where you just put them completely in the cellar, where it's just again the worst possible thing you could imagine if you're again if you're a fan of that team.
Yeah, bro. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean like because we talked about teams like Philly and Phoenix, right?
Sure.
Where we were kind of thinking that those may be some of the amongst the worst situations to be in the NBA. It's the Mavs now for sure
Yeah.
because again, you had a championship caliber team and you completely botched it to the point where now you're probably not contending anytime soon. Because, like I said, even next year, you can't do anything because Kyrie's not coming back for most of next season, right? Maybe they pull a rabbit out of a hat and get Kevin Durant. I know that was kind of rumored before the deadline, but like, still, I just it's a bad situation, and it may only get worse from here because
Yeah.
they're
Good
gonna start
luck.
losing a lot of games now. So.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, another team that's in kind of a rough spot right now, nowhere near as bad as the Mavs, but a team that's, in a bit of a pickle right now, the Memphis Grizzlies, where they were hot for most of the season, right? And then recently they've had a little bit of a slide, 3-7 in their last 10, and it's in the roughest ways where for basically 3 straight games where they lost right at the end, you know, for reasons just that you just kind of shake your head at, right? Where you have a game against the Knicks where OG Anunoby hits a corner three to put him up, Ja misses the layup, and the game's over. Then you have another game, right, where you're playing the Spurs, right, and no Ja Morant, no Desmond Bain. They're blowing out the Grizzlies in the early portion of the game. The Grizzlies fight back. Then De'Aaron Fox, who hadn't been playing well, hits a game-winning, turnaround jumper to win the game. Right, little that one's at the buzzer. Then you have a third game where Desmond Bain has the ball, the Grizzlies have the ball. Dyson Daniels for the Hawks strips Desmond Bain, and then Karis LeVert goes down and gets a game-winning layup. So that's
Yeah.
3 straight wins right at the end, which hasn't happened, I think, since this. I think it was the 2002 Seattle SuperSonics, right? Like just the way that they lost all of those games is just crazy. But then it gets worse because in that Hawks game, Jaren Jackson Jr. gets hurt, and now reports are he's going to miss at least a couple weeks with a grade 2 ankle sprain, probably more time than that, right? Which basically puts him on track for, at the earliest, close to the end of this month. And they're already sliding. Their defense had already been slipping before he got hurt. Now your defense is going to be in a real tough spot where they're going to have to start out scoring teams pretty much without the guy who's basically been their best player this season because Ja has not been as good this season as he had been in the past. I know he's been battling a shoulder injury, but Desmond Bain, to his credit, has played great. They've had some other young guys that have played well, but this is the stretch where they're going to need Ja to kind of return to form here because if they don't, I'm not saying they're going to completely slide into the play-in, but they're not that far off just considering, just where these teams are at, right? Because like the Warriors have been surging, right? They've been winning games left and right, also have a very easy schedule. So that's going to help boost them as well anyways. And then, the Rockets have not been playing that great, but, the Grizzlies have been playing worse than them. And then the 3 teams above them probably aren't dropping, right? OKC is not going anywhere. Neither are the Lakers or Nuggets. Even though their schedules are tough, maybe they lose games, but, they're in a different spot. So I don't know. Like the Grizzlies, they were kind of a sleeper team going into the season, right? They were playing great for most of the season where they were top 5 on both ends of the floor, but they had started to slide in recent weeks, and now they're going to be without their best defensive guy and the guy, like I said, that's been their best player this year for an extended stretch. And that hurts because now that's going to put them with the rest of the pack. And that's kind of been one of the issues for the Grizzlies the last few years is that there's always been some type of injury bug that keeps some of these guys out. And he had been very healthy this year. He was healthy last year too. And you could see that last year, all the opportunities he got really helped him. But, now they're going to be without him for an extended stretch. And it hurts because, now they might slide, because again, they're not that far off.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a combination of bad luck and inconsistency, and I think
Right.
that's why a lot of people, considered the team to be a good team, but how will they look in the playoffs? Because I think that's the end game question if you're a 1 through like 6 seed or something like that. So I think that's what people are concerned with, and it's starting to rear its ugly head where it's not that Ja is a bad player. I think it's just the certain levels of consistency. Will we get that in the playoffs? Will he be his best self? Who knows? And then obviously the injury, like you said, losing Jaren Jackson Jr. That's a huge deal. That's like the equivalent of the pre Luka Lakers losing AD, right before the postseason starts. Like that's kind of how I would frame that. And I don't really know what to say about them because I think you and I both had questions about them, but we thought they were a solid team. Still think they
Right.
do. They do have the depth. I think they have the depth to keep themselves afloat. Like
Yeah.
I think Houston probably falls a little bit more than them.
Okay.
I do see Minnesota kind of maybe being able to leapfrog them alongside Golden State, but we'll see how that
Mhm.
goes. But yeah, Golden State is the one to watch for sure because if Minnesota's dealing with injury concerns and the inconsistent play continues from their superstar and some of the bench guys too, I just don't think that that's a recipe for success.
Yeah.
If they go past the 6th seed, then I think we have a big issue because that team really shouldn't be in the play-in. Granted, there are some teams that are in the play-in, like Minnesota right now, that shouldn't be a play-in team, but that's because the West is so talented and, condensed. But, yeah, if Memphis falls into the play-in, that's going to be rough.
Minnesota's been in the play-in for most of the year. The Grizzlies were a top
Yeah,
3 seed
I
most of the
know,
year. So
yeah.
so that'd be the worst part just
Mm-hmm.
from, from that perspective. But yeah, and that's the thing, like you said, because again, losing those 3 games right at the end is the killer part because if you win all 3 of those games, right, which were all very winnable games, right, then instead of being 38 and 24, right, I guess, you'd be what, 41 and 21,
Yeah, you be
basically?
smooth sailing.
Yeah, because they've lost 4 in a row, but one of them was to OKC. So you kind of just chalk that one up to you were probably going to lose that one anyways. But and that wasn't close, right? The other 3 were literally like 2 point losses. So like if you had a scenario like that, right? Yeah, then you're right with the top 4. But instead, you've lost 4 in a row, and you're gonna lose more at this point. Like you said, maybe they don't completely slide because if Ja is at least relatively okay. I think he said he shouldn't have played in the OKC game, so maybe he's really banged up bad. But, if they can get their depth guys to start playing well, maybe that can help them stay afloat, because they are 4 losses ahead of Golden State, and then 5 losses ahead of Minnesota, the Clippers, and the Kings. So, at least you got that to look forward to, at least from the perspective of, because there's not a ton of games left, right? Like, most of these teams are getting pretty close to 60 games, right? If they're not already there. So there's you're talking about less than 25 games for most of these teams at this point. So, now, you just kind of have to maintain and cuz that's a decent amount of games over the course of 20 games to be ahead of, which is a good thing, but they're going to have to probably start stealing some wins against teams that are going to be tougher to play against without Jaren Jackson Jr. Because
Yeah, for
again,
sure.
because that's the guy that's been their rock this season, pretty much. So they, like you said, they do have a lot of depth, so that helps them more so than, like you said, maybe some other teams if they lost one of their best players. But it's still tough because again, you at this point of the season, this is the worst time to pick up any long-term injuries, especially with the standings being so congested. Any injury to one of your star guys, could outside of OKC could bump you down because like OKC is so far ahead. Um, their one seed is safe. Like it's not mathematically clinched, but
Mhm.
they pretty much have it. So like they can get away with resting guys or kind of just experimenting with certain things the rest of the way. But none of these other teams can do that, right? Because like some of these teams have some really tough schedules. Like the Lakers and Nuggets, their schedule is very difficult the rest of the way. So they're gonna have to, kind of turn it into overdrive and hope and pray that they can stay healthy. Because any of these teams, if they don't, they're going to start sliding.
Yep.
But, with the Lakers and Nuggets, you do have a little bit more of a cushion now because now if Memphis starts sliding, the only other team that could probably catch you would be either Houston or Golden State. And, those teams will have the opportunity to play them, but I believe the Lakers have the tiebreaker no matter what. They've played them 3 times and they won all 3. The Nuggets have only played them once. And I'm not saying the Warriors are going to go all the way up to 3. I'm
Right.
just saying, for from the Grizzlies perspective, it's tough, but that's kind of been the story of their franchise for a while now, where it just seems like they just can't seemingly have a season where they can stay healthy for the vast majority of it. Because even this season, like, yeah, Jaren Jackson Jr. was great, but Ja's been kind of banged up, right? And that's and they've been able to sustain and win without him playing as much. But like I said, this is the point in the season where we need to see the best version of him, right? Because again, they got to start racking up some wins because you don't want to go the other way.
Oh yeah, it's a rough situation, but I think it's one to monitor for sure.
Yeah. And and that's kind of just how this goes at this point, right? So but then you kind of look around, just to kind of mention just another team just kind of out of the blue, but like the New Orleans Pelicans are starting to, look alive, right? Where they're starting to get some more wins, and you got Zion Williamson actually playing really, really well as of late. Where now all of a sudden they've talked about he's in great shape, right? I think they mentioned he's down to 264, which is like the lowest that he's been at, which is great. I watched him play the other night against the Lakers, right? And they couldn't stop him at all. He had 37, right? So you look at this stretch of games that he's been playing recently, where pretty much every night, he's been by far their best player. But the thing that you kind of look at is now we're back in business from the Zion perspective of okay, now his value should be higher than it was before. So is there a scenario now where now you decide to keep him? Do you feel better about trading him because maybe you get more back and you're not selling him or you're not getting rid of him when his stock is really low? Or, what do you think at this point? Because I know we've talked about they should probably move on from him. Has your stance remained the same or has it changed based off of what you've seen from him lately?
I'm gonna say you keep him. I think the number one priority for this team is obviously health for sure. And I really think they should be trying to lose as many games as possible because if they nail a top 3 pick, I think that makes up for, losing out on, or not losing out, but losing Brandon Ingram a little bit. And I think, you can recoup some talent through the draft if you have that top 3 pick. And maybe, you're lucky enough to snag a guy like, Dylan Harper or something like that. Like, I think that would be an awesome pairing between, him and Zion, because I think that alleviates, some of the pressure on DeJounte Murray and other guys like that. And allows them to kind of play a little bit more freely along with Zion because we know, what he can do. And, he's always been a beast. Like, there's never been a doubt about that. It was always a matter of your availability. So when he's on the court, I think that's the tough part about gauging a guy like him because the pendulum swings so much. When he's on the court, you love him, but when he's off the court, you hate him and you don't want him on your team because he's quite literally doing nothing for you but racking up losses because he's not available. But when he is on the court, it's not like these are empty stats. He keeps them in the game as long as it is a competitive one. And yeah, like you said, he's pretty much an unstoppable force when healthy. And if he's in the best shape of his career, allegedly, and it looks like, he is, I think the proof of concept is there 100%, then I think
Mm-hmm.
you need to continue to build around him. And yeah, that's kind of my short take on that. I mean, like, and I know that's a far cry from what we were talking about early on in the season, but that's kind of just how I think it's going to go with him, just due to the fact that when he's healthy, he's amazing.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah, that's kind of, and that's the tough part, right? Where it's like, that's why it's hard to part with these type of guys because when they're playing well, this is kind of the realized version of them. It's just tough because I think the question still remains how healthy can he be, at this point, the rest of the way because he is in better shape. Like, and again, like he's putting up really good numbers even while not playing as many minutes, which is pretty wild. But
Mm-hmm.
just in general, it's something to watch just because we know that he had kind of been in rumors for a little while, right? They ended up not trading him, but we know that they probably weren't that far off. But, for the Pelicans, again, they're in kind of a weird spot, right? Because they traded for DeJounte Murray. He won't be back until, I don't know, probably midway next season at the earliest because he tore his Achilles. Obviously, they moved off of Ingram, got some veterans back. We'll see what they do. But I don't know. It really depends on how much do they feel about this? How do they feel about this team? I mean, it was a nightmarish season from the start. So maybe they talked themselves back into let's just run it back, see what it looks like when we're healthy with like kind of a different ish mix of guys, right? Because then it's like eventually it'll be if he comes back, right? Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion, year two, Yves Missi. I don't know if they keep Olynyk and Bruce Brown, but that's a decent group. But is it good enough to be able to get into the playoffs? I mean, worst case scenario, it should be decent enough to get into the play in if they're healthy, right? Because you assume, you know, Dallas is probably going to be out of it, because we don't know what they're going to look like. I don't know what the Clippers will be like next season, right? I mean, like they've been good, but they are an older team, so there's no guarantees there, right? And then, Phoenix, what do they even look like, right? Because they may just kind of go the nuclear option with their
Yeah.
team. Who knows? Right? So there's a pathway for them to maybe get in, but I think now he's played at a level where if you're gonna trade him, you at least got to see what the best offers are, right? Like because before you might have thought like just get him out of here, right? But now I think with the way he's playing, you can't do that. You have like if you don't get any good offers, then you might as well just hang on. But if you do get a good one, you at least got to think about it because I mean, at the very least he's playing really well. So if this is an actual step in the right direction, then that's good. It's just again we got to wait to see because you just never know because there's a lot of times where we've gotten fooled, by some of these situations. So we'll see where this goes.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Moving on, according to Hoops Hype, right? So now you got some Kevin Durant stuff going on, I guess, right? Where, there's been, according to Hoops Wire, right, teams that will probably look to pursue Kevin Durant, right, because of obviously what's been going on with the Phoenix Suns. So we got basically, I guess, what, 6 teams, right? So we got the San Antonio Spurs, the Dallas Mavericks, which we heard at the deadline, the Timberwolves, which we also heard at the deadline, then the Rockets, which we heard last summer, the Miami Heat, which I think we heard before he was traded to Phoenix, if I'm not mistaken, right? That was like a team that he was interested in going to. But that was before Phoenix. So that was when Butler was there. I don't know what they would do with that. And then also the Lakers, interestingly enough. So with this situation, obviously you're the Durant guy here. So is there a team here that you think either A, makes the most sense, B, has the best chance of him contending if he gets there, or C, you just want this situation to end so you don't even care where he goes? Because, again, like each of these have varying degrees of how they could pull it off. Because I think we've talked about Minnesota before, but because they're a second apron team, they would have to do some stuff first before they could even get him. Like they would have to just basically dump guys, like you just dump Julius Randle to another team and not take anything back. Whereas some of these other teams, I think, could acquire him a little bit easier, right? Like I think teams like the Rockets, the Spurs, I don't think the Mavs are in the second apron. I think they're a first apron team. So they'd have, and then the Lakers, I think, are a first apron team, but they're close to the second apron. And then the Heat are a first apron team as well. So, what do you think of this? Just because it seems like we're kind of, I mean, obviously we'll see what Phoenix does at this point, but can't imagine there's like a version of this that ends positively. I mean, we already had a scenario where Mike Budenholzer basically told Devin Booker, you need to quiet down, buddy. So that
Yeah.
I mean,
the team
so what do you think?
is cooked. The chemistry is chalked. I think it started when, obviously they were shopping Beal very, very publicly, and they were quite literally trying to sabotage and make him feel some type of way about, being on the team and whatnot. They were trying to scapegoat him, which, I think he has his fair share of blame, but I think as a whole, the organization has, proven that they just didn't know how to build a team at all. But regardless, in regards to the whole Kevin Durant thing, I don't know what his motives are and what his motivation is going to be. Is it the money? Is it longevity? Is it more rings? But those are kind of the factors that I look at. Um, I think Dallas would be intriguing
Mm-hmm.
for sure. I think that would be super intriguing. And I would also say Minnesota. That was the one that I predicted, just
Mm-hmm.
because I think there is some chemistry there, between him and Anthony Edwards, and I think that would kind of be cool to see him in a mentorship role like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, that's one of the ones that you'd have to pull a lot of strings in order to get that to happen. The Lakers one, I'm not really buying in on that one. The Miami Heat one, I'm not too high on that one as well. So I really think it's down to Dallas and Minnesota. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think Dallas makes a lot of sense because you basically be building, a new big three. He already has the chemistry with Kyrie as well. So
Mm-hmm.
there's ties on both ends on those. What is Phoenix looking for in return? That would be another question as well.
Yeah,
Um,
because you'd have to look at it from the perspective of what does Phoenix want back, but also Durant with 1 year on his deal. Where is he comfortable going with where he
that's my
signs an
point.
extension?
Yeah,
Right. We're assuming whoever he goes to, those talks would have already
yeah,
kind of been
yeah,
in
yeah.
place, right? And then what the reporting suggested that he would prefer to go to a contender. So I don't think he would love the idea of kind of just going to a team that just kind of exists, right? As like a situation that's like, okay, this is better than Phoenix, but it's not really that great, right? I think the idea was that he would prefer to go to a contender. It's just again, which of these, is the most realistic option? Because, like you said, Minnesota would be cool. It's just that's a tough one just because of all the things you have to do. The other ones are a little bit easier. It's just a matter of, again, what are you going to get back if you're Phoenix? Because how much can you realistically get back in the first place? Because the problem there is that, again, with him, probably going to be wanting out, right? He's an older guy with 1 year left on his deal, right? You're probably not getting a whole lot back if you're Phoenix in the first place. Could you at least get something back that's not horrible? Because, maybe, and then just kind of be like, all right, let's go with Booker and Beal, and then whatever else we can kind of scrounge up, okay. But, because you can't really move on from Beal. So that's kind of what I would be looking at there. But, like you said, the Minnesota one is cool. The Dallas one, if Kyrie didn't have a torn ACL, I would actually like that a lot too. It's just you got to factor that in, so you'd have to wait until he gets healthy, right? And then again, like some of the other one, like the Spurs would be interesting because it'd be a combination of young star, plus older veteran star, like you said, kind of like Minnesota. Just Wemby is a different type of player from Edwards, right? Just and then and like with the Spurs, I feel like their pieces I don't know, maybe feel a little bit more movable because they're not a second apron team. And then also like, which guys are, kind of locks, right? Because it doesn't feel, because if you've watched them play, like Vassell's been better as of late, but not a whole lot of their young guys outside of Castle. You feel like, oh yeah, we have to keep these guys. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
they're all
Like obviously
movable for sure.
you got Fox, you got Wemby,
Yeah.
and then after that you have players that maybe you kind of like, but unless you just feel like, all right, maybe Vassell's had a down year, it's kind of hard to be high on him now compared to going into the season. And maybe it's just kind of a downish year. But either way, yeah, I like most of these destinations. Like I said, the Heat one is just kind of bizarre, just because I feel like that's the one that's probably the furthest away.
I think the
That one.
Lakers one is. Oh,
Well, I just mean like from the perspective of like the people there. You know what I
okay.
mean? Like in terms of
Yeah.
like, is that one really a contender compared to if
Okay.
he went to
Yeah.
the other ones? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that would kind of feel like more so like I just kind of want to go where I want to go,
Yeah.
as opposed to like I actually do want to win. Most of the other ones I could see. I mean, even the Houston one, I still feel like is just kind of a weird one. But I guess it depends again on how they feel about some of their young guys, right? Maybe some of their young guys they feel a little bit more comfortable shipping away. Maybe with the way Amen Thompson's played, maybe you feel better about moving on from like a Jabari Smith Jr. or something like that. I don't know how Houston's feeling about that, but and they have a little bit more of an incentive too because they have Phoenix's picks. So Phoenix could get their picks back, and kind of at least make this a little bit more salvageable than it would be if they just kind of just did a trade and then just got stuff back that probably wouldn't really
Yeah.
do much for them. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and I think the key part here is I think Phoenix has no leverage in any of these trade
right,
discussions and situations,
right,
and that's the problem. Like, and we already know that KD doesn't want to be there. He's made that abundantly clear. The
right,
organization has made that abundantly clear. It's very
right.
obvious that he will not be on the Phoenix Suns any past the season.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a this is how trades are normally done. When it's like a star like this who asks out pretty much
Mhm.
without asking out, and it turns into an all out bidding war, and whoever gives the best kind of deal, I guess that's what's gonna go down, and I am curious because yeah, I don't know what Phoenix is gonna really be
Mhm.
entertaining number one and number because you got to get rid of him. You can't run it
Yeah.
back. You can't,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's not his fault. It's just
Yeah.
you
That's
can't
that.
run that back, bro. You can't.
No, not at this point. That
Look at the
that
team.
experiment's pretty much done. Now then for the last story, this one is another tough one. Jalen Suggs looks like his season is over. He had knee surgery, right? A cartilage fragment was removed from his knee. So never really a great thing there. Obviously, he's a guy that has had some injuries over the years. Initially, it seemed like it was just kind of a bruise, but he had been out for so long that you were
Mm-hmm.
just kind of wondering what's going on. And then, obviously, now we know what's going on, right? So, he had a really serious injury there. So that stinks. Obviously, for the Magic, they had already had a horrific injury riddled season, anyways, where it just felt like, you know, you felt going into the season based off what you saw early on, you could be really high on them. Then they have the run with Franz, and then they're both out, and then Suggs is out, and it seems like he's the guy that's kind of the glue from the perspective of like once he went out, they were pretty much done, even with you know some of the other guys like being out, like because they could at least sustain a couple of the other injuries, but he was seemed like the final straw. And for the Magic, it's tough, right? Because you look at it as like this is going to definitely be a disappointing season because they probably don't make the playoffs. Maybe they're in the play in. I mean, I guess you look at them in the standings, and that right now they're what like 8 or 9, excuse me, because they just lost to the Bulls right at the end, and they've lost 5 in a row, right? So we know at this point, I guess at least Franz and Paolo are back, but their offense is horrible. We know how this works, right? They are a top five defense, but they're a bottom five offense, and their offense is again, it's one
Mm.
of the worst things you'll ever see in
Oh
your
my
life. It's
god. Yeah.
it's really bad, especially
Yeah.
with Paolo and Franz. Now their shooting has kind of gone back down, right, to where now they can't consistently hit outside shots anymore. Like Paolo's been better recently, and that's at least the silver lining is maybe those guys can finish the season healthy and then just kind of get more reps doing their thing towards the end of the season. It's just obviously like in the off season, I do wonder what their thought process is because I think they do need some offensive upgrades, but I think you could also at least look at it from the perspective of, well, we had a horrific injury riddled season. There's no way that can happen again, right? And so then maybe, they just kind of make some minor changes and then just kind of go from there. That's probably the most likely scenario. I mean, unless some random crazy trade comes out of nowhere. Because I feel like with Suggs, Paolo, and Franz, that's a pretty solid trio of guys, right? Paolo will get paid and then they'll kind of go from there. But, it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth because this was a team that we did pick the under on, but we still thought they'd be really good. We thought, like, hey, the East will be better. So even if they don't win, you know, significantly more games, they could still be a better team. But now the under is really only because of the injuries. Because if they were healthy most of the season, we would have been probably really wrong And that probably could have been a team that could have gotten close, like, 50 wins, maybe, or something like that. Probably close to 50, if not a little bit over. But just in general, it stinks because again, this was a team that looked like it had a lot of promise, but again, injuries can kind of derail a season, and that's what it seems like for them. It's just rough because you would at least think with Paolo and Franz that they could win some games, but everything's just kind of gone in the complete opposite direction. It's tough, and it's not great to watch. It's not good basketball.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this slightly, like a week or two ago or something like that. And the way that I put it was, it really feels like we're regressing in terms of, um, well, no, I shouldn't say we, but the Orlando Magic are regressing in terms of, who is the franchise guy? Because I think it is very neck and neck at this point between Paolo and Franz. They're both very skilled players, but it seems like they're still competing for that number one spot. And I don't think that's the best, thing for the squad, obviously. And there's been severe regressions in terms of both of their games. Like you said, Franz's, outside shooting has completely tanked, and for some reason, Paolo has fallen in love with horrible mid-range shots instead of going to the basket. It's the weirdest thing ever. And like you said, I think it does come from the fact that they are missing, another integral part of their team, which is Jalen Suggs, because he is somewhat of a connector piece out there on both ends of the floor. But the truth of the matter is they are missing a traditional point guard, not necessarily a scorer, but a guy who makes Paolo and Franz's job is a little bit easier, and you don't have to rely on say a Paolo to be the initiator, and I think that's the problem there for sure. And I think they have had some guys who have shown the flashes for that, but I don't know if they're long term. Like Anthony Black, cool, you can start a play, but how many times is it going to be executed to perfection from your standpoint? Cole Anthony,
Right.
more of a scorer, so. And the sad part is in this next draft, in this upcoming draft class, there's no real table setters that come to mind. So I don't know how they're really going to address that
Right.
off rip. Maybe you try and finagle a trade or something like that, to
And
go out and go out and get one of those guys. But yeah, that's another thing. They need shooting as well. The KCP thing, that has looked like complete crap. And that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. It's kind of sometimes how guys in those tiers, when they do get signed on a, new contract, that's kind of how it goes. But at the end of the day, yeah, you do need to address the shooting issue because, if both of your superstars aren't going to be able to, hit outside shots, then you need to complement them with, a lineup where all those guys can shoot. So I don't know what to really say about them. I think part of it is the injuries for sure. I think it is a big factor as to why the record is so bad. But then you look at the execution when they got some of their guys back, and it just didn't look the same. So I think it's a level of consistency and, getting some more upgrades.
Yeah. Well, and we'll see what they do. Because, like I said, I don't expect them to do much in the offseason except,
Nope.
like I said, probably pay Paolo. Maybe they bring some guy in the draft with whatever pick they have, maybe. And then, probably after that, I don't know. I mean, do they trade any of their guys? I don't know. Because, again, like, Paolo and Franz still look like, franchise guys. Or, it's just from the perspective of, like you said, they need to kind of find some additional piece. But with those three guys being max guys, there's not really anyone else I can think of off the top of my head that you could bring. I mean, I guess Nurkic mentioned Anthony Simons. I mean, that would be a completely different type of player because he doesn't give you much defensively, but he's also, to me, more of a scorer. Like, I mean, I don't really look at him as like a
No.
playmaker. But I guess but I guess if the thought process is, well, Paolo and Franz, no matter what, are going to handle the ball a bunch anyways, just get a guy that can space the floor and can attack as another guy. That would be interesting. It would just come down to what do they have to give up. But again, like you said, not a ton of their young guys, not that they're bad, but some of those additional guys, like you don't have to have. Like with Anthony Black, like you said, he's shown flashes, but I don't personally feel like he's done enough to where I
No.
feel like, yeah, that guy's a keeper. You know what I
No.
mean? Like he can defend, I guess, and he can, pass and play make, but there's still something missing offensively, which was the concern about him going into the draft.
It's
And
the
if that
aggression.
doesn't, yeah, and if that doesn't get shored up, then then it's just probably not going to happen. So that's what I'm kind of looking at, where like maybe they make a move like that, but I don't know. It just kind of comes down to how they feel about it. Because I think, like I said, I think you could look at it as everybody was hurt. Let's just see what it looks like if they're hopefully healthy, or we make some type of drastic ish move. But I think it's probably more likely that they end up just running it back with their guys and just kind of hope that they can play more than 2 games together.
Agreed. Yeah.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts about the Dallas Mavericks situation, the Memphis Grizzlies, Zion, right? And, even the Orlando situation, right? Let us know. Or Durant, like if you think he's going to go somewhere, right? If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the end of the video. Continue to like and subscribe as well to help our channel grow, right? So that way we can continue to give you quality content. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next episode.